video, in the last, I left you with the question. Why is it that on this list, Descartes includes imagines or sensory perceptions, given that the external world doesn't exist? And I said that by investigation, we'll be able to get better. I am then, in the strict sense, only a thing that thinks. I am a mind or intelligence for a reason, words whose meaning I have been ignorant of until now. But for all that, I am a thing which is real and which truly exists. But what kind of thing? I've just said, a thinking thing. So how is it that reflecting on this notion that help us well understand what he means by a thinking thing, and why has he been ignorant of the meaning of intelligence, interact, reason now, right? I mean, that's a little too. He thinks it's only now, it's only after having meditated and having doubted the existence of the external world, of bodies, of physical things, things, that he's in the strict sense, a thing that thinks, and that up until now he didn't know what it was to be a mind or an intelligence or intellect or reason, right? He was ignorant of their meaning until now. How could that be? I mean, it seems quite odd. Well, before we turn to answering this question of how is it that the imagination or sensory perceptions could be on this list of what he is, a thing that thinks, right? How could one of his modes be imagining or sensory perceptions, given that we've doubted everything existing in the external world, given that we doubted the things that are being sensed or imagined? There's another passage where he brings up this idea of a strict sense. So I know now that even bodies are not strictly perceived by the senses or the faculty of imagination, but by the intellect alone. And that this perception derives not from their being touched or seen, but from their being understood. And in view of this, I know plainly that I can achieve an easier, more evident perception of my own mind than of anything else. So we're going to be working towards an understanding of this, and we'll have to do that in class after we talk through the wax passage. So this is sort of the conclusion of the wax passage. But notice here that that again, he's using this word strict. Okay, so going back to our question, how is it that imagination and sensation could be on this list? Let me flip to the other side of the handout, because that'll help us in answering the question. Okay, how can Descartes claim that imagining or sensing are modes of thought if he doubts that there is an external world? I mean, isn't he going back on his doubt when he claims that he's sensing? Well, no. And I mean, you might want to pause the video here and ask yourself, why not? I mean, why isn't he going back on what he said before? Why isn't he admitting now that there's an external world? Well, for now, all that he's going to mean by sensing and imagining is the thought component of sensing or imagining. That is, the colors or images in the mind, right? He's not going to be paying attention to whatever connection those colors or images might have or not have to things out in the world. And when he's drawing this distinction, right? I mean, so we've got the reality side of the picture, and then the knowledge side. right? And remember, on Descartes, on Aristotle's view of resemblance, right, we had the objects of sense. And they caused the sensible species in the senses. And so that was, they caused, right? And the sensible species resembled the objects of sense. And what Descartes is doing here is he's sort of abstracting away from the reality side of this picture and just focusing on the sensible species side. And when he's doing this, he'll often point out that he's done this. He's restricted and pared down the sense of a term like sensing or imagining. He's pared down what he means by that by saying that he has it in mind in the strict or precise sense. I think if you go back through the meditation, you'll notice a number of places where he uses this locution, strict or precise. And the Latin word that's getting translated here is precise, which means to cut away. And so he's cutting away everything except the acts of thinking themselves. So everything that's not part of the sensible species, that's not part of the knowledge side of things. That's getting cut away when he talks about sensing and imagining, and he's just focusing on what happens in his own mind. Finally, when he speaks of himself in the strict or precise sense as a thinking thing, he's also cutting away everything out in the physical world, everything out in the bodily realm, and he's claiming that that his essence is only to think, but he's not claiming that he doesn't have a physical body, right? So he's not claiming that that there is no part of him that's a physical thing. Rather, he's claiming that his essence, insofar as he's a thinking thing, i.e. in the strict or precise sense, is to think. But he's leaving open whether he, as an animal, might essentially have a body, right? So he's leaving open that we might think, he's leaving open that Descartes, that it might be part of Descartes' essence to have both a body and a mind. It's just that he can't be sure about the body right now. And so in the strict or precise sense, he's going to mean Descartes as a thinking thing, as a being with a mind, even though there might be other parts of his essence that he's not attending to, that aren't included in that strict or precise sense, right? So the strict or precise sense is just cutting away all of the other stuff that may be there. It might be in his essence. It might be part of his essence to be a thinking thing, just as it might be a part of the essence of a sensible species, right? Of my sensation of gray, or my sensation of cubicality or sphericality, right? It might be part of the essence of having that sensation, that it's coming from some object out there in the world. But right now he's cutting that away and just focusing on the mental part of that sensible species. And similarly, when he speaks of himself strictly as a thinking thing, he's cutting away the other parts of himself that might be included in that essence. In order to get a distinct perception of what he is as a thinking thing, right? So the way in which up until now he the way in which up until now, he didn't know what it was to be a mind or an intelligence or intellect or reason, right? The way in which he was ignorant of those words up until now is he never saw what it was to consider the thinking thing as strictly apart from its body, right? Always when he considered what it was to be a mind or an intellect or an intelligence or reason up until this point, he'd considered such an intelligence as connected to a body, as essentially connected to a body. It was mixed together, right? This conception of his rational powers was mixed together with his bodily nature. And so he didn't have a distinct conception of reason or the intellect. And so he was up until now ignorant of what it was to be a mind or an intelligence or an intellect or reason, strictly speaking, right? Because it was confused together with being a body or having a body. And so when Descartes examines his own mind, right, he attains a kind of distinct perception of what he is, right? His essence as a thinking thing, right? So as the cogito, that part of his essence that is a thinking thing. And similarly, when he turns to examine the wax and tries to figure out how he knows it distinctly, he's going to be trying to figure out how he knows what it is, what the wax is, what its essence or nature is as a physical substance, as an extended thing. And so here too, by introducing this division and cutting the mental substances away from the bodily substances and separating these two kinds of substances, these two kinds of realities, Descartes thinks that he's going to be able to get distinct, i.e. not confused, not mixed together perceptions of what each of them is essentially. And so he's therefore going to be able to make progress in answering the question, what is it, both for minds and for bodies. Because up until now, he's mixed together the what is it, the answer to what is it, the essence of each of them into one confused idea. And it's only through doubting that he's able to separate out these two elements and get them both distinctly into view. So here, through analyzing my own nature, I've come to know what I am in a new way. I've come to know my essence in a new way. And I've analyzed out all of the features of myself that seem to be compounded in my idea of myself and arrived at a new answer to the question, what am I? And in class, we're going to turn to Descartes' examination of the wax and how he comes to know the piece of wax in a new way. And we'll work through those passages together and look at his consideration of whether it's through the senses that we know the wax, through the imagination that we know the wax, or whether finally it's through the intellect or the mind alone. And so in preparing for class, think hard about how this account of the capacities we have for knowing the wax relates to Aristotle's conception and back to Plato's conception. So we're going to want to keep both Aristotle and Plato in mind in looking at Descartes' account of how we know the wax. And what I want you to see is how the picture of our faculties for knowledge that Descartes has is picking up elements from Aristotle and building on elements from Aristotle, and how it's also picking up on elements from Plato and building on elements from Plato, while also rejecting elements from each of their accounts. Okay? Okay, so I will see you in class.